This
web
conference
methods.
will now be recorded.
Okay.
Okay.
I know very well about web methods, MuleSoft, Boomi. Okay. Actually, we are expecting one project in JBoss Fuse. So just I need to understand like what we can do. What is the difference between the other integration tools and this tool?
Okay. 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 Fine.
So I'm familiar with all JMS, MQ, middleware web services.
Okay. Fine. That's good. So basically, JBoss Fuse is a product from Red Hat, and it is used as in enterprise service bus, where you can do the system integration. It provides you multiple features where you can do the development and deploy your applications, integration application. Then you can monitor them. It also provides two links where you can do the provisioning and other things. So it's built on top of OpenStack products. So, for example, it is using multiple things for different operations. For example, for routing and mediation, so it is using Camel, Apache Camel. For basic messaging support, it is using Apache ActiveMQ. Uh, it is using Spring for multiple things. It is using some sort of runtime container, which is Karaf, and it has a lot of plugins and other things with third-party libraries. Okay, so JBoss Fuse is basically deployed in a OSGI container. So the runtime which hosts Fuse and your integration application on top of it, it is basically called Apache Karaf. So it's a OSGI specification. It's a Java container, but it is running on principles of OSGI. It stands for Open Source Gateway Initiative. It's like another way of saying how you do the modularization, how you define the dependencies between your application, how can when you use this kind of container, how your dependencies will be resolved, right? So it talks about OSGI talks about all those aspects, and Apache Karaf is being taken as the runtime container inside Fuse where your application will be deployed. So
Okay.
here, if you want to deploy multiple integrations, then you deploy them as a normally they in a Fuse terminology it is called bundles. So you will be building an application, making is a bundle, and then you will deploy that into the container. So your one particular bundle will do a specific task, and it will enable integration between system A and B. And whenever a message comes on A, it will do the whatever integration logic you have written, do and then send a message to B. Likewise. So, for example, if you have worked on MuleSoft, then suppose that you have to read a web service and then process the data and then send back the response. So two entities are there. Similarly, here also you will have two systems or entities which you will be integrating using multiple approaches. So
Okay.
here, slightly the deployment model is like, for example, if you have worked on things like um, a Tomcat or JBoss application server, then we bundle our project, right? So whatever I want to deploy, I will bundle them into a deployable deployable uh, unit of work like war or ER, right? Where all my dependencies, configuration, everything will be there, and then I will deploy that into the application server.
Yeah,
The advantage
deploy
is,
like a Java application.
yes, yes. So here the slightly different model is used, like where you don't worry about carrying your dependency along with you. So, for example, I have a requirement to do a database project where I will connect to a database, read some data, do some transformation on the message data, and then I need to send the message data as a message to JMS queue. So here I have dependency on databases, I have dependency on message broker, but I don't need to worry about carrying those dependency along with my application. So what deployment model says here is, you define your dependencies and let the dependency be resolved by the container. So when you build your application or the bundle, you don't combine the database jars, or you don't combine the message broker jar or third-party jar along with you. You just define them. Say that I need a dependency on SQL Server, I need a dependency on ActiveMQ broker or WebSphere MQ broker, or I need a dependency on PostgreSQL, and then it will basically inject a deployment descriptor kind of specification inside your jar, and when you deploy that small jar, it will try to find out all those dependencies within a range. So Fuse will basically try to resolve your dependencies. If those, so what Fuse carries, it also carries a lot of third-party libraries along with it. So you don't have to worry about versioning and whether this version is compatible with version X of this third-party library is compatible with version Y of this third-party library or not. So all those dependencies are being taken care by the container itself. In case you don't find a dependency which is not resolved by the container, there are multiple ways through which you can tell the container how to resolve the dependency. So your application becomes lightweight, and you have a clear-cut instruction that I need XYG dependencies, and I expose ABC services. So that is the OSJ part that comes into this deployment model. So once your dependencies are resolved, then Fuse will start your application, and then it will work like any normal Java application. Okay. So where we define these dependencies are defined inside the bundle. Basically, it's a jar file with extra manifest information. So you will have an extra manifest.mf file where you clearly define your dependencies. Dependencies are like your import packages, and then you can also, if you want to offer your application as a service to others, then you can also define your services, which is like export package. So your import and export package will be defined, and then it will be available inside the Fuse. So all your imports will be resolved by the container, and all your exports will be exposed by the container, so that others can also use it. For example, I am working on a utility which can be used by some other teams if they're using the same container. So I will say that I am exposing such and such service. If somebody wants to use the service, they can just say, for example, I'm exposing a service com.test.xyg.utils. If somebody wants to use my classes, they will just import com.test.xyg.utils.abc class, and they will be able to use it. That dependency resolution will be taken care by Fuse because both our applications are deployed inside Fuse.
Okay.
So, and then where Camel comes into picture is Camel is for your routing and mediation. So when we write the integration logic, when we do the system integration, so we need to know from which system I'll be getting the input and to which system I need to send as output, right? In between the input and output, we do a lot of work in integration. For example, we validate the data, we transform the data, we remove some data, we add some data. So all those things has to be done through some engine or some sort of process. So Camel provides that. So Apache Camel is basically your integration framework, and it gives you options where you can manipulate the data, you can enhance the data, you can get the data from multiple sources, combine them together, and then present a unified data. So yeah,
sure. Sorry to interrupt you.
no problem.
Mapping all, it's a drag and drop, just like we need to write a code.
Camel, basically the JBoss Fuse provides a developer studio where you can do drag and drop.
Okay.
And then you can connect the wires and saying that from this, all those things you can do. But it also gives you code behind where you can go and manipulate directly. Suppose that if you do just drag and drop, you may not be able to fine tune a very nice transformation logic or validation logic. So you can also use the code behind and then manipulate the integration. So Camel basically is an integration framework. It is not an enterprise service bus. So service bus is Fuse. It is just one part of the Fuse, and it provides you ability to do routing and mediation. So by routing and mediation, I mean the processing aspect of the integration. So here, when we say Camel is used for integration, basically we define routes. Routes are like your workflow where you accept the input, do some processing like validation, transformation, conversion, calling any pattern, etc. And then you send it to output. So you have input, output, and in between the input, output, you have a set of steps to do processing. So for
Yes.
example, I read from a file, and then I need, for let's say it's an XML file, then I will do the XSD validation, and then probably I will also do a transformation, and then the final output I will send to a queue. So this kind of things. Camel basically gives you multiple options, as you asked, like is it just drag drop? Camel gives you multiple option where you can choose the way you want to write your integration logic. So that particular aspect where Camel gives you option to choose the way you want to write your integration logic is called domain specific language, DSL. So Camel supports multiple DSLs. If you are good in Spring, you can write your integration logic in Spring. If you have worked on Java, it also provides an option called Java DSL. If you somebody is good in Groovy, they can write the integration logic in Groovy. That is, there is an option called Groovy DSL. So multiple options are there. Uh, Fuse is running, as I said, Fuse is running in a OSGI specific container. So over the years, they have also involved XML like DSL, which is called Blueprint, which is kind of optimized little bit for OSGI containers. So if you
Okay.
write Spring logic in Spring, it will still work, but the Camel guys and Fuse guys, they say you should write your same logic in Blueprint, which is also like XML Spring DSL, XML like Spring DSL, but it is little bit optimized for a particular container like OSGI. The optimization in terms like it gives you more options, hooks to connect to the runtime and then get more data in a very nice and easy way compared to doing the same in Spring DSL. But most of the time, from my experience, I have seen that people use mostly either Spring DSL because they have worked on Spring a lot, or Java DSL because they have a background in Java. But we mostly, when we go for the classes, most of our samples will be in Spring DSL. We have few samples in Java DSL also, few samples in Blueprint also, so that depending on your requirement, background of the team, you can choose one of the DSL and do the integration.
Okay. So
It heavily uses Spring, um, dependency injection, IOC, everything is being heavily used in Camel. So with that, somebody has a Spring background, they will find it very similar, very familiar, and they will be able to use it in a nice way. So in case of Camel, what basically we do is we define a unit of work. Uh, when we get an input, we define a unit of work, and then that we work on that unit, and then finally it is sent to another endpoint. So Camel has. So you may be asking like, what is the advantage of using Camel with your ESB background? You might be aware that why we use this kind of ESBs or integration framework, because we want to reduce our time to integrate, right? So if I have to read from a file and then write to a queue, and then in between I have to do some business work or business logic also, then I would like to focus mainly on the business logic and leave the how to connect to file or a queue to the my integration framework itself. But if I do the same thing in Java, I need to take care of how to connect to a file, open a file, close the file, then how to connect to a broker, what happens if broker is not available, all those things I have to take care. So Camel gives you ready-made interfaces for the real world entities. These are called endpoints. So almost anything you can imagine for the business, all those things are available as an endpoint inside Camel. So we just need to use those endpoints, and then we can configure those endpoints and connect to the real world entities. For example, I want to connect to a file or folder or FTP or a queue or topic or a web service or database. everything I have an endpoint. That endpoint I need to know how to configure. I need to pass, for example, if it is a database, I need to pass host, port, username, password. If it is a queue, then I need to pass broker, URL, port. Probably if it is a normal authentication, then username, password. If it is LDAP, then some other ways. So depending on how you want to connect, you have to give the options, and those options are configurable. They come as part of the endpoint itself. A lot of exhaustive documentation is available. What are the options available? There are some common options which everybody knows, but there are also some advanced options like if I need to do some extra work which is not done by most of the people, some extra features or facilities I can use on the endpoint. There's a lot of documentation available from Camel, so we can just refer it. If you use Developer Studio, you can also see the documentation link, and it will also show you the options, readily available options, so you can just fill and configure. So you don't have to worry about the real world entities. Camel will give you the interfaces for them, and then you can just use them and then connect. So you can focus more on the business logic. So what we do in the business logic. So inside the business logic, when I get an input, that unit of work is called exchange here. Okay. So exchange is the most common word you will hear in Fuse or Camel world, Apache Camel world. So exchange is basically your input that comes from one point, and then you manipulate that input, or basically we say that we work on the exchange, and then we send that exchange to another endpoint. So this exchange has a format. It contains headers, it contains a body, and then it contains some extra properties. So when we go deeper into class, we'll understand that model, how it looks like, what are the types of exchanges, what is the difference between exchange where you send a request and wait for reply, compared to an exchange where you just send a request. For example, if you're connecting to a web service, so you get a request and then you send a reply back also, right? So that exchange will be different from exchange that you just read a file, right? So that exchange will be different. So a file exchange will be different compared to a web service exchange. Common structure remains the same, but there are some features or properties that make both of them not the same. So we'll understand what are the various types of exchange, what are the exchange patterns. Um, there are multiple differences that says that how your file exchange is different from your web service exchange. So all those things we'll understand. And then basically we'll also, as part of the classes, we'll also understand how do I run my integration logic. Let's say I understand something, I have written the logic, how do I run it? So there are multiple ways of running Camel. Basically your integration logic runs inside Camel. So because those routes are Camel routes, so you need to run them inside Camel, inside a container. So we'll understand how we run them. Like Camel can be done as a standalone application. You can run directly in Eclipse, or you ultimately you need to deploy that in Fuse. So we'll see how the deployment works in Fuse. What is the quick way to do the deployment? What is the standard way of doing deployment? How I can deploy Fuse first and configure it for my production. So all those things we'll understand. We'll also see, like later we'll also, as part of the class, we'll also understand what kind of exception handling we can do in Camel, because it's Java at the end of the day. And then uh, exception and Java are like, they go hand in hand. So there will be issues, there will be connectivity loss or data issues. Then we need to understand how we'll handle those exceptions. We'll also understand, like I have written my integration logic, then how can I unit test it? How can I ensure that my code, that integration logic that I've written is correct? So we'll also talk about unit testing in Java. Later I deploy my application into Fuse and then something is going wrong. Then how can I debug it? So we'll also talk about debugging. So we'll talk about not only writing the code, but also talk about deploying it, debugging it, and unit testing it, so that you cover end to end. Okay. Then we'll also see some normal use cases, like how we interact with databases, how we interact with um, brokers, how we interact with internal components of Camel. Camel also comes with some ready-made enterprise integration patterns. So one advantage of using Camel is over the years people have identified a pattern, usage or problem, and they have converted them into a pattern. So for example, with XML, you would have experienced this use case like based on some condition, you want to split the XML and then process it. So if I have to do the same thing in a Java world, then what I need to write a parser, say X or DOM based on the requirement, how I want to split, and then I need to manage the entire thing, right? Camel provides you a splitter pattern where you can split an XML based on various conditions. You can say split node wise, split based on a particular pattern. So many options are available. Also, there are some requirements like where you need to collect data from multiple sources and then combine as an input. For example, lab. If you have experience with pharmaceutical or lab domain, you will be getting data from multiple labs. Then you to combine a report and send to the customer. So Camel, so it means that I need to wait for data from multiple sources, uh, and then I need to combine the data and then present to the customer as a one report. So Camel provides the pattern called aggregator. So using this pattern, I can wait for data. I can wait for data on a specific condition. I can wait for data on a specific count or some particular custom information, and then I can combine and create a report and send to final destination. So these are some things which we face daily in integration world, and then we don't have to write code for it. It is already converted as a pattern, and we use it. So as a good architect, we'll try to identify the usage, and then we instead of writing a boilerplate code, we can use the pattern and customize it. So these are few advantages that Camel provides. Uh, Even if the patterns or components or existing uh, uh, data transformation or validation strategies are not enough, Camel has a lot of flexibility and extensibility. It gives you option that you can write your own code, hook it up with your integration logic. So let's say there is a requirement where I need to uh, write a code which is very custom to a particular client, and that code is not going to be reusable for any other purpose. So I can write a Java code, plain POJOs or beans, and then I can hook them to a integration route, and then the work will be done as per my Java logic. So if you have any specific requirement where you need to write very fine custom logic, or you want to hand over the control of processing to a Java code which is already existing. So now many of the times we come across this scenario where we already have some libraries or utilities which are built on top of over the years, and we just don't want to throw them away. So they will say, oh, why don't we use this library? So Camel has a flexibility where you can make minor changes in the existing libraries, and then you can even use them for the integration. So we'll also see some examples like how can I use custom logic and then hook them up with my integration logic and then you reuse them. If you want to expose them as a service, you write a new library and you feel tomorrow that it can be used by others, then we can expose them as uh, utilities and they can use by another people. So all those options are there. So we'll talk about all those things. Any questions?
Shiva, yes, have a few questions. Okay,
Yes.
so can we build API like a microservices, web services using this?
Yes. So
Okay,
basically, Camel is, if you see, Camel is like a proposed solution in a way that you do a very particular work in a route. So your routes are not generic. Your routes are for a very specific task, and from there, this microservice concept is there, right? So you do a one work and you do it very cleanly. That is what a Camel route does. So we can write small services, deploy them in Fuse, and then they can work independently, and they can be leveraged by other services. We can write small, very specific. For example, I can expose REST APIs, deploy them in Fuse, and they can be used by other teams. we have also done some integration where we deploy this SOAP services. Now nobody new development, most of people avoid it, but you can also deploy SOAP based web services and Fuse. It uses Apache CXF, and uh, we can deploy them in Fuse and it can run smoothly. REST services are like most of the people use nowadays. So you have a lot of flexibility to define your REST services. There are a lot of components provided by Camel. It supports a lot of third-party APIs. There are multiple ways through which you can expose REST APIs from RESTful APIs from Camel.
Okay. And about EDA document processing, EDA document processing.
Yeah. So it supports multiple formats. If you have gone through this Camel components list, if you have not, I will share the link. There are multiple endpoints and which supports EDA. So you can choose like what there's no common endpoint called EDA, but there are multiple depending on what kind of processing you have to do. There are multiple endpoints which you can pick and then use it.
Okay, okay. So basically, your answer is we can do EDA document processing also.
Yes, yes.
Okay, okay. So, like, did you get a chance to do any EDA integration in your application?
There is no direct
No, no, I'm
integration.
asking you. No, I'm asking you, did you
No,
get
no,
a
I have
chance
not
to?
done. I have not done. What we have done is
Okay,
we get lot of files which are CSV files, okay, and then we have written parsers which will convert that into some format, and then we submit it to some financial systems. So, and then they have some EDI processors already written that processes. So we
okay,
make the data EDI compatible, and then they from there they pick it up.
okay. Because the reason I'm asking, because which we are expecting that project that's a totally EDA processing system. So just we need to replace the excuse me.
So the site is down for some reason. Camel basically support this if you want to directly use EDI, Smooks library, okay, which has good support for EDI, direct EDIs. Hello?
Sorry, Shiva, I was in mute. Okay.
Okay.
Is it any chance you can cover EDA document processing? Like just I need a small sample processing, like extract the data from the CSV and convert to EDA document and send it to some FTP location, or maybe extract the data from the EDI. I mean, reading the EDI file and extract the EDI document and sending the information to CSV.
Yeah,
Is
we
it any
can.
chance?
Yeah, yes, we can do that.
Okay, okay. So, see, for 20 years, I'm in IT. I'm like a kind of a core Java developer last 50, I can say up to now. And as well as I'm using a lot of integration tools. For me, it is not going to take that much of time. As long as you show me the few processing, few steps like mapping and validations, business rules, and
Yeah.
if you show me that if you set up the infrastructure and my system, um, so that's more than good enough. Just to take like a few business use cases, like a kind of a EDA to file and a database to file. That's more than good enough.
Okay.
And just we can see the like how to dropping the message into the MQ and how to consuming the messages and how to
Okay.
create services. How to create the web services. Like a
Yeah.
four, 4 or 5 business use cases. Just to show me those and explain me. Um, I'm more comfortable with your training, and you provided very good information in a short period. It's amazing. Thank you very much. And uh, remaining things I will discuss with your team. Okay.
Sure, sure. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we can. So except EDI, we whatever you spoke, we already have samples for that, but we can work on the EDI.
Yeah. See, if you do not provide me about EDI, it's like a kind of a see again. I have to spend so much time because
No,
which
no,
I
no.
do not have, which I do not have. That's why I'm like a kind of a, just I requested your team to arrange this one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So that's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Okay, good. If you have nothing else, I'm good from my end. Let me know if you have any additional questions.
I do not have anything. I do not have anything. But just to send me the few details, like a kind of about installation softwares and other details. But
I will
that's
mail
okay.
you.
But I'm anyway. I'm a lazy. Definitely after just you can provide me some guidance, then I can install all the softwares. Okay.
Sure, sure. Okay, no problem.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
bye bye. Good
Bye
night.
bye.